Guillermo del Toro is one of my favorite screenplay writers, directors, and producers, and he is coming out with a new TV show on October 25th called Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. And to prepare for his new TV show, I'm looking at his older works and finding some commonalities. Today we're going to start dipping into Del Toro's body of horror work, and we're going to start with Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. A remake of a 1973 horror movie that terrified Del Toro, his family, and his peers upon their viewing of it. And it stuck with him so much that he later wrote a script in the 80s for a remake of the movie. At the time when he wrote this script, nobody wanted to produce it without significant changes, so Del Toro shelved the project. About 2 decades later, a studio approached him and said that they would make Don't Be Afraid of the Dark using his original script, but so much time had passed since he'd originally worked on the project that Del Toro didn't want to come back to that as a director, and instead he actually recommended Troy Nixey. This is Nixey's debut, and as far as I can tell, really his only outing as a director, although I think he did a great job. And it's worth noting that Del Toro still was the screenplay writer, producer, and did the voice of all the monsters and like a lot of the scary breathing sounds and stuff, so he still was on set and a huge influence on the work. It had been Troy Nixon's goal to create a terrifying horror movie that was PG-13, and to this effect he limited swearing, actual use of blood, and on-screen violence. But even with his best efforts, the rating board came back with a rating of R for extreme violence and terror. He did inquire what he could do to change the rating to PG-13, and the rating board asked him, why ruin a perfectly scary movie? Del Toro himself saw the R rating as a badge of honor, and he implies in several interviews that any truly scary movie gets an R rating for one reason or another. The protagonist, Sally, is played by Madison Bailey, who was 11 at the time of filming, and she does an amazing job. Her curiosity and her fear and all of her other reactions are very believable and are what sell Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. So it's very impressive that she was able to pull all of this off as an 11-year-old. Further, there's a lot of behind the scenes for Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, and one of them features Madison Bailey explaining how she never actually saw the creatures. When she was acting, there's nothing there. They just had like a light beam pointed where the creature should be to focus her attention, and she had to pretend the creatures were there. And I just thought that this was really cute because she seemed really excited to explain her acting process, explain how she knew the right way to look, what she was imagining in her head. It just felt like good and wholesome, and after all these horror movies come out where you see they actually try to scare actors to get the right performance, or they actually put them through pain or something traumatizing, it was nice to see what appeared to be a pretty kid-friendly setting, or at least as kid-friendly as you could get. And her performance is still great. So it also goes a long way to showing you do not have to traumatize anyone to get a good performance, nor should you traumatize anyone even if that was the only way to get the performance. So Don't Be Afraid of the Dark might be on my personal list of top 5 most terrifying movies, but is it goth? Absolutely. This movie is hands down one of the gothiest things to ever goth. I consider it like a modern take on a classic Victorian woman isolated in a lonely old manor kind of story. You can see a lot of those elements one for one directly pulled. Add a couple of ghosts in there, or the potential for her to be going mad, and it's exactly what I want for my gothic story. Anyone wondering what makes things goth on this channel specifically, I have a video here that outlines the 9 points that could make something gothic. You need 3 of these 9 points to qualify. And of these 9 elements, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark has 8 of them. Number 1's horror elements. I was on the verge of panic the first time I saw this movie, and even though I knew everything that was going to happen, I was still terrified the whole time. It starts with a mini adventure that shows the audience the real intensity and danger that's there in the house. And then after we know what the worst is that could happen, we get to travel with this modern family through the home and through the slow unraveling to what we're hoping for them at least won't be the same worst case scenario we just witnessed. Characters king in this movie. Sally, the child protagonist, is really the driving factor of this movie. Who she is, what she's been through before, what she's going through now, and what she might go on to do in the future are all big elements of this. And the supporting character here is going to be her dad's girlfriend, Kim. And Kim has a huge character arc. And it's really beautiful, and it's something that you can sort of connect to right away and empathize with. And I just think, generally speaking, audiences are really going to enjoy the relationship between Sally and Kim. As far as more poetic prose go, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, the mini adventure is good. And then right after that, we get into like this introduction stuff with Sally meeting her dad and Kim, and all the way until Sally is exploring the grounds outside. I found the shots to be not quite right. And I don't know exactly how. It's got the same kind of moving camera that we see in a lot of Del Toro's work, and it has these beautiful detailed scenes and sets and all that kind of stuff going on. And all of that works in the rest of the movie. But there's just like these 15 minutes where I was looking at it and feeling like it was less than in some way and just not quite right. And like not in a spooky way. It's like when you're eating a food and there's something in there you don't like and you don't know what it is. It was like that. And then we get past it, we get to Sally outside exploring the grounds. And from that point on, everything is right. And it all makes sense and looks great. Very Del Toro style with the big sets and all of the detailed rooms and detailed art pieces. And they have this fairy lore with these original art depictions, and all of it just looks great. And in fact, if you just like folklore and you like that creepy dark fairy fae kind of thing, just for the art depictions and the little bit of lore that we get on that is connected to like larger actual fairy tale lore, this movie might be worth your watch. Elements of loneliness and longing. I think that Sally is probably one of the loneliest girls that you'll see in a movie in a long time. She really wants to go back to living with her mom. Her dad has her at this house that's super isolated. She's estranged from him. She's even a little afraid of him, it looks like. And eventually it leads to like this connection and relationship development with Kim, the father's girlfriend. She's drawn to these creatures in this supernatural danger specifically because she's lonely and looking for friends. And she's thinking these things that are whispering to her and saying they want to play with her are going to be like companions and somebody that she can hang out with. And of course, this story's got a supernatural element. And like on a more personal note, I love stories with fae and fairies in them. And especially this like dark, creepy creatures you have to bargain with and live in fear on. Like this is exactly the kind of fairy and fae story I want. And the kind of fae and fairies that are like smart and crafty and dangerous because they're also sort of feral. It's like perfect. It's exactly what I want. Questioning a character's mental health and reality. Sally starts out as a troubled youth in this story. We find out that she's on a couple of medications, and they make some stray comments about her maybe having like some kind of celiac disease or ADD or ADHD. It's implied that the father doesn't believe she has any of these disorders. It's just that like the mother would rather medicate her than actually address problems. But at the same time, the father is very dismissive of the child. He says things about Sally like,
she's run away before.
Sally is supposed to only be 8 years old. So the fact that she has run away more than one time, enough that the father sort of shoulder shrugs it, like implies there's some kind of trauma or mental unwell, something mentally not quite together. The adults do question whether she's having some kind of psychiatric break and whether that explains her description of these creatures and her fear of the house in general. Making use of folklore, superstition, and myth. Another thing that's great about this film is they take the setting of the Blackwood home and they set up the last Blackwood who lived in the house as a natural scientist. And from him being a natural scientist, they transition him into observing these fairy creatures and drawing them and observing their habits and writing it down. But when he did this is far enough in the past that this is sort of like a bit of a folklore and superstition element. And also the librarian who shows Kim all of his drawings and whatnot has these other folklore little tidbits he sprinkles in about the Pope making a deal with the Fae. And last but not least is a strong sense of place. The house and the grounds in this movie are stunning, and all of them feel real and like you could go on a walking tour of this home. But the entryway is beautiful, the study, the child's room, the bathroom, the big tree right in front of the house, house and like the hedge maid's garden with the koi pond. All of it is really distinct, memorable. It has like all of these details. The door to the basement and the hand carving there was amazing. When we get into the basement, the general layout, even though it's dirty and run down and sort of dust filled, like all the piles of crap that are hanging out there on the floor pretty much remain the same, and you can sort of like track where it is and where the stairs are relative to the ash pit. It all feels like something you could walk through. It feels very tangible and real. Going a little into my observations of the movie, while the mini adventure is good, there's about 15 minutes there between the mini adventure and when Sally is exploring outside the mansion for the first time where things are not quite gelling. And I'm relieved that it's just in that one section where things are not quite right. Beyond that, the visuals are impeccable in this movie, and there are so many little things. A couple of scenes probably stick with you for a while. There's a very scary bathroom scene. I think the final climax scene where they're all facing the monsters is incredibly scary. There are a couple of near misses of like the dad getting his eye poked out that are super scary. When Sally is locked in the study and all the creatures are like attacking her and she's trying to keep them off with a Polaroid camera. And the other thing that's really striking in these scenes, besides like the visuals and the terror, is there are a lot of moving components. In the study scene with Sally, there's a bunch of little fairy monster things like running around. She's pushing a bookcase, books are falling. They're trying to like cover the fireplace with this big picture so there's less light so they can come after her. Like there's just a lot of dynamic elements on set, and it all stays with the rules of these fey creatures and what they can and can't do. And I really loved it. The way things were shot so that they were like peeking up underneath the bed or behind the bear or from the film grate. All of that was excellent and gave an extra sense of terror because you could see all the little places that none of the people were looking at these fey things either were hiding or could be hiding. And sometimes you would get a shot where they weren't there anymore, but the carnage that they had left behind was there. Storytelling components like Blade 2, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark has a little mini adventure in the beginning. Pretty much tells you everything you need to know. And what's interesting about this particular mini adventure is it's sort of like a reverse of what you expect in the horror genre, because usually in a story like haunted house setting, everything starts off normal. We get like a feel for the character's daily routine and for what they're doing with the house and whatever, and then slowly things start to go wrong. But instead, the Blackwoods tail end results of living in this house and interacting with these fae, and it's a bloody, gruesome ending. It reverses the audience expectations, so it catches you off guard. Now we're going to go back through all this calm, mundane setup for the next family, already knowing what the potential worst case scenario it is. So there's like a huge sense of stakes. Making that protagonist a child instead of an adult was an incredibly smart move on Del Toro's part. First of all, it justifies the innocence and curiosity Sally has when she first starts hearing these voices and goes looking for them. And like when she first interacts with them and asks if they really want to be friends or if they want to play or if she can feed them. She has a couple of scenes where she's like talking with them and offering them raisins and stuff and like trying to be on their side. And because the audience has already experienced these things kill two adults and abduct a child, we're terrified for Sally. It also makes sense that she would start like with this innocent assumption that they really do want to be her friends and they really do want to play with her, and they're just like a little mischievous. And the fact that Sally is a child gets around the old haunted house trope of why don't they just leave the house. In Sally's case, she actually does leave the house when a lot of times you don't even see an adult protagonist do that. The problem is that Sally is a child, so when she leaves, her dad finds her and drags her back to this awful house. Another thing that's great about this movie is everything felt necessary. There weren't any scenes that felt like filler to me, or that felt like we could have trimmed some fat down, or that weren't going someplace crucial to the story. And I love that every single scene and every moment we had made the story better, drove its conclusion, and like continued to build tension and lore and complexity for us. Overall, the world building for this story is really deep and engrossing. In fact, when researching this, I found out that Del Toro has a book that he wrote from the perspective of Blackwood, the naturalist, that's about these fae creatures. And I'm kind of considering purchasing it, although I'm not 100% sold on it yet, because it seems like just an added element and layer to this world building that would build more appreciation for the movie and for the character design and for the rules of these fairy beings. But everything about this story is perfect because I would love to do more stories in this world. Like, we could do a full Blackwell story in it, as Del Toro sort of has with his book. Or I'd love to hear a story about the next people who buy this home. Or maybe this home never gets sold because of all the horrible press and they decide to tear it down, which could also be a great thing. It could release these fairies to the world, or the fairies could fight back on the construction zone. All that stuff could be really interesting and scary and immersive in this world. But also, this story connects me to Sally specifically, and everything that happened is a fulfilling, complete arc. But like, if we got a prequel about Sally or a sequel where we see how Sally deals with this trauma after the fact, I like both of those a lot. Like, I would be really interested in those. Don't Be Afraid of the Dark 2, coming to a theater soon. The world is so well built that there are so many different things you could do within this world that would be really interesting to watch. So talking about the story directly, I was scared the first time I watched the movie, and I was equally intense this time. Of the three main characters in this movie, the dad's the one who deserved to die the most, and I'm a little salty that he survives. Also, this is a really minor character thing, but he is an architect who has been working on this house for months, and he never realized there was a basement. He's a pretty terrible architect, and he probably deserves to get fired / go bankrupt. Most of my notes about this movie and the characters are about Sally. She was really interesting and compelling. I enjoyed her portrayal immensely. Madison Bailey did an excellent job portraying her, but she was also like really well written. She was very complex, but she still felt like an actual child and not like a little adult, and I appreciated that. I also really enjoyed Kim and her arc, where she started off like either wanting to send Sally back or not wanting to be Sally's mom. And then like she had that moment that felt really real where the dad was being like a little bit like abusive towards Sally, the way he was yelling and kind of shaking her, and she was obviously scared, and Kim kind of like pulls the dad aside and is like, that is not anger, that's fear. The fact that she recognized that and that she had like this moment of connection because Kim had a crap childhood and Sally is enduring a crap childhood right now, that like spark was essential. And it was such an excellent moment that told us so many things about all of those characters without having to spoon feed it to me. All of the Kim, Sally moments are really good. There's like a moment before Kim manages to connect with Sally where she asks if Sally wants to make scones with her. And I have this note that's like,
scones, not cookies or cake or something that a kid would actually want to eat, but a scone.
And it's moments like that where she's doing something that should allow the two to connect, like baking together, but she's not getting the recipe quite right. And watching like the trial and error of Kim trying to connect and better understanding the child and eventually like becoming closer to her than her own father is was really something special. The arc that Kim gets as a character gives like this emotional center to what is like a larger wrap part of like, you know, the basic haunted house scary movie. And I think that's part of what makes a returning watch worthwhile and what makes it continue to be scary no matter how often you watch it. So before this rewatch, I would have confidently told you that Don't Be Afraid of the Dark is in my top 10 all-time favorite horror. But now that I've rewatched it, I can confirm that it's in the top 5. That mini adventure that's like the end of Lord Blackwood and his family is just so creepy and scary. I couldn't even watch what was happening on screen. I was so afraid. I was just listening to it, and it was making me do like the quickened breathing, and my heartbeat like sped up during that time so much my Apple Watch alerted me to it, and my dog came over to sit on me. And some of it's probably that I'm just like sensitive to horror in general, especially body horror. The flip side is that this is a really scary movie, and the creatures in it stand up. Like, their construction still looks great now. The scenes are beautiful and haunting. All of it is great, and it's a perfect movie for if you want to be spooked this Halloween season. Some overarching themes in the filmography: we continue to see big detailed sets with whimsy and lots of interesting visuals. The fear of the underground is still present, although in this movie specifically it's going to be a basement and the ash pit within the basement, but it's still like this dark cave-like element seeping into Del Toro's film work. shining a light in the dark, macabre, and horrific, and also reviving some darker, creepier elements in fairy tale and folklore and bringing them to life in a modern setting. And then a couple of spoilers that I foresee looking forward. I know there are parts of Don't Be Afraid of the Dark that's going to come up in my review of The Strain. I've watched The Strain at this point in time, but I haven't finished writing that outline. But I know I have a couple notes that connect it to Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. And I believe that we'll end up discussing some elements of Don't Be Afraid of the Dark when we talk about Pan's Labyrinth, The Orphanage, and Mama. Comparing the straight horror film with these more existential dread and comparing the fairy tale work here with the fairy tale and folklore work he does there is going to be a worthwhile and engaging comparison. Have you guys seen Don't Be Afraid of the Dark? And if so, what did you think of it? Let me know in those comments down below. And as always, keep reading. Bye!